Hello, no mai, hoki mai, and welcome back to day 2 of the Financial Services Council 2020 conference, Generations. We hope you've had a relaxing break following our morning of commerce insights and expert analysis of the future of retirement and economy. It was great to see such robust discussions and debate in the regulatory space. And it's a privilege to actually have the wisdom and insights shared so close to us making our voting decisions. Knowledge is power. And wow, what an unforgettable closing session Dr. Susie Wiles delivered. She has proven the value in database decision making. There is no running away from the truth of science. And her ability to demystify the most complex subjects like microbiology is a testament to her passion for the subject. Well, it's not over yet. For the next hour, our breakout sessions are brimming with expert knowledge from right across the sector. Our curated panels of industry leaders weigh in on the power of data in insurance and the potential silver linings for the investment world in a post-COVID economy. Our Generations and Trustees sessions will look at the future and discuss what is needed for the sector to not just thrive but to survive beyond 2020, and also analyse what the future of New Zealand's team of 5 million plus will look like. Thank you again to our sponsors for supporting these sundowner sessions. Once again, in all sessions, there's an opportunity for questions and answers, so take note and enjoy. Mā te wā.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Russell Hutchinson, taku ingoa, ke Chatswood Consulting, aho I mahi ana. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, I'm Russell Hutchinson of Chatswood Consulting, and I welcome you to this session. And a big thanks to the Financial Services Council and Richard Cliffin and his team for organising this event in difficult circumstances. Today's session is about the next stage in New Zealand's insurance data revolution. Could that free us perhaps from problems of non-disclosure, faulty memory, misstatements, improved pricing, and improve how we market and tailor our products? The Ministry of Health is going to reveal some plans for the consumer data access, and our insurance experts are going to talk about the impact of better data on claims and underwriting and pricing. So I'll introduce the members of our panel. John Herries is Group Manager Emerging Health Technology and Innovation at the Ministry of Health. John and his team are focused on bringing technology to the health sector, ensuring that technology provides impact, and establishing a network of interested and expert people and organisations who are working to make new technology solutions for the health sector. John is not just a data nerd, he has hands-on experience, so to speak, as a physiotherapist, and so has a practitioner's viewpoint as well. Alison Manning, I've had the privilege of working with for a number of years, and is Head of Propositions, Life and Travel at Cigna New Zealand. Alison has been leading the efforts to renovate the product offer of one of our most dynamic insurers. Nathan Thomas, our panelist, is Director of Data Science and Multinational Sales at MONTOUX, a very data-focused startup based in Wellington but operating around the world. Nathan has over 20 years' experience of life insurance in New Zealand and in the UK as well. More recently, he's held the roles of Chief Actuary and Head of Customer Proposition too. So I'm going to briefly ask each participant to say hi and let us know why they're interested in this session. And if I could, maybe Alison, I could start with you, please.
Thank you, Russell, and hi and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be part of the conference and particularly to be involved in this session. I've worked in the insurance industry, both in New Zealand and various countries around the globe for, dare I say it, over 20 years. And although I have seen and been part of many changes and innovations, I don't believe we've really seen the disruption that we need yet, not in the mainstream at least, especially when you compare it to many other industries. You look at telecoms, you know, the likes of Uber, Amazon. And I think Gail talked yesterday about the accelerating the customer agenda session about the underinsurance of the New Zealand population. And in order to really make a difference and get the engagement that we need, I think we need to be brave and do things differently. And I think utilising the technology and the data in a way that we can break down barriers and stereotypes and increase customer confidence and trust is a key to doing that.
Cool. John, can I ask you to introduce yourself and give us a couple of words?
Koutou ko John Harries, Takaungawa ko Ngāti Ruanui Takuiwi. My name's John, and I'm the Group Manager for Emerging Health Technology and Innovation here at the Ministry of Health. My background, kindly explained by Russell, focused a lot on my clinician hat, which I increasingly can't wear these days. But I've also got an interest and a background in health economics, and previously worked at EY in Europe in healthcare and technology consulting, particularly in the economic space. Two pieces of work that might be of interest to the audience. If you want to ask some questions, my team put together the first cross-border health service in Europe. So that was the congenital heart disease service for the island of Ireland, so between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And I was also a part of the financial planning and economic analysis for the development of the National Children's Hospital in Dublin. So just a couple of interesting things that are quite different, but might be of interest to people to ask questions about.
Awesome, thanks, John. And we're going to hear from you in a moment on your presentation, but first, Nathan, would you like to say hi?
Yes, talofa everyone. My name is Nathan Thomas. I am the Director of Data Science and Multinational Sales here at MONTOUX. My background is very much as an actuary, actually, so data is very close to me. I've been working with data for a very long time. So I guess the idea for me of a data revolution, it's a story and a theme I guess I've been hearing for quite some time, but I certainly think this year, you know, there is a lot going on in the data space around the world, and I think, you know, to Alison's point, life insurance in New Zealand is very much behind a lot of other industries and a lot of other countries. My passion for data isn't actually coming from being an actuary, it's actually being a life insurance customer myself. So I certainly see a lot of the revolution from data coming at it from a customer angle now in terms of improving customer outcomes, understanding the customer better. And I think that is a driver, particularly after the recent conduct and culture review. I think that is a real driver that is going to create a real revolution in New Zealand.
Fantastic. I'd like to hand back over to John, and if we can have John's presentation, that would be brilliant, and then we're going to go back into panel.
Thanks, Russell. Name of the presentation is Building a Trusted Health Information System, and I tell the story on a regular basis, and I'm hoping it helps you ask more questions than necessarily gives answers, because something that is easy to do when you work in an IT department is build things and come up with answers for people. Something my colleagues and I are working really hard on is making sure that what we build is what people want. So if you've got ideas or different ways that we should be doing things, or you want to get in touch afterwards, we're more than happy to keep talking about this. So from our perspective, the role of technology in health has traditionally been one where we collect a bunch of data from our systems in order to tell us where to improve. So we create systems that tell us that people are getting good cancer care or not, that people have comorbidities or not, that they're getting the right care at the right time in the right place. But largely speaking, that's kind of been the role of technology, and particularly data in healthcare. From our perspective, digital gives us such an opportunity to think differently. We can think about the role that personalisation and digital services offers to deliver different services for different groups of people easily, reliably, and more engagingly. We can also think about not just that, we can think about how we can deliver care differently. So there's a guy called Terry Lee, who is a bilateral amputee upper limb. a rural firefighter in Australia. If you Google his name and rural firefighter Australia, you'll find a video that was in the Health Informatics New Zealand on their website, and a part of the conference last year. 5 years ago, he would have been completely dependent. As a burns victim and someone without any hands, it's pretty hard to get along in life. Since he got Alexa in his house, Alexa has changed his life. So Alexa, made by Amazon, AWS, allows him to turn the shower on and off by himself, turn the dryer on and off by himself. That's the dryer of his body. Open and close doors, turn the air conditioning up and down, turn the TV on and off, and act as an intermediary with his wife if he's not been a good husband. So there's a whole lot of things that mean for Terry, he's now independent when 5 years ago he would have been completely dependent, which is a very different model of care. What's of somewhat more interest to us is the thought that consumers and whānau could be at the centre of care. So generally speaking, as you probably know, the health system's been designed around the health system. So we tend to design the systems that collect data, the services that we deliver, and our interactions with patients in ways that suit us as a health system. So you have to go and see your GP. Until this year, that was kind of an anathema that the GP might see you now. Also, our hospitals run outpatient clinics at the hospital. And when you're sick, you go to the hospital for care. So the opportunity with digital and with technology is to kind of flip that on its head and to let consumers become the driving force of healthcare. In that context, we started with thinking about a life course approach, which some of you will be familiar with. We explored the life journeys of some key personas throughout the population and used them to identify a number of different scenarios, including kind of what their customer journey was normally like, what pain points and opportunities they had, what they thought a future experience would look like, and the types of benefits that would exist for the health system. This took us a fair amount of time, but we think it's a reasonably good picture of where we should be going and what we should be focusing on. When you boil it down, essentially what we're talking about and what people are looking for is they know that there's a lot of information out there in the cloud or in the clouds. They talk about knowing that someone has their information and they know that it's their information, and we know it's their information because it's bound to an NHI number. But what we're lacking is kind of that ability to get it to people. So when you talk to people, they say, well, just give me a pane of glass, just give me one interface, and let the system connect up all of the data that relates to me so that I get the data I want when it is I want it. You'll notice the one thing that was missing from the clouds when we kind of presented that was identity. So something that's kind of central to our thinking about changing the data landscape, putting consumers at the center, is the ability to have a digital identity that's trusted by consumers. So in that context, we started doing some work to understand how we might get to a point where we could have a digital identity that joined things up. And we started by looking around at problems we had and things we controlled. So it's often easy to experiment in places where you control the elements that you want to experiment with. So we looked at the fact that explaining my medications is consistently the lowest scoring answer in the National Patient Experience Survey. So only half of people believe we actually explain why they're taking their medicines. There's an estimate that medicines-related harm costs us about $220 million a year. Despite that amount of harm, we only got 300 consumer-reported side effects for medicines in 2018. And there is some estimates globally about adherence, so that's whether you take your medicine or not, costing, particularly for chronic conditions, up to $317 billion a year globally. So from our perspective, we looked at some of those things and we thought, oh, well, maybe we could work with consumers to see their own medicine. So we built an app, we called it My Meds, and it's not for public consumption at this point because it's for testing answers to questions we had. One of the things we learned was that basically the information we have about medicines is for consumers, is for clinicians, not consumers. So Given that we don't explain why people take medicines, or people don't understand why they take medicines, it was surprising for us to learn that only 70 of the top 100 prescribed medicines in New Zealand have a patient information leaflet. So that's a leaflet that describes what the medicine's used for, what the likely side effects are, in a language that's easy to understand for consumers. We also started to realise that there's very little in the public domain about how to interpret and present health information to consumers. So how do you translate clinical language or clinical speak into words that people on the street understand? So an example of that is some of the vaccination information, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Something else we learned was that an agile approach and public cloud tools tend to be a very cheap and fast way to do things and test answers. So we built this application in 12 weeks, cost us about $150,000. And what it did was allow you to create an account, sign up. So sign up with a username and a password, confirm what your NHI was, and we could bind it using some processes that confirmed you were who you said you were, and then allowed you to see your medicines. So the medicines data comes from the electronic prescribing service that we run with general practice and community pharmacies. What came of version 1 was, so you can log in and see what your medicines are. So what? Do you know what I mean? So you can see what they are, and this becomes the conversation that often people talk to me about with regards to, well, isn't this what Manage My Health is? And I think Manage My Health is a good starting point. It focuses only on GP information. So it will show you what your GP information is, but it doesn't necessarily show you what your private physio said, what the hospital said, what your pharmacy has done, whether you had the medicine dispensed, problems like that, discharge summaries, things like that. So there's a bunch of stuff that it doesn't have because it's really a reflection of the GP record. When we built this, 2 parts to it. So the first part was creating and maintaining a digital identity. So that involved 4 things. So authentication, so that's the username and password, providing some identification, so telling us who you were. So we use driver's licenses for that. Verification, so this is proving that you own that driver's license and that you are who you say you are. That's not that easy. So some of people in the session will be aware of things like deep fakes. There's a bit of an arms race in this space between the ability to verify who you are and the ability to break that verification process, and then the authorization process. So a number of you will realize the largest consumers of healthcare in just about all developed nations are the very old and the very young. Generally speaking, they have people helping them make decisions about the care that they get. So there's some delegation questions, and there's also consent questions. So are people informed in their choices about how they receive care or what care they receive? So on the right hand side was the things we thought about in terms of presenting medicines information to consumers. So we've got a data source, which were the dispensings in EPS. It's available via an API. Ironically, the API wasn't designed for a consumer application. So things like response times of the API, how many milliseconds did it take from calling your medicines to showing them in the app? Those become interesting questions. We've got a data interpretation layer, which is a universal list of medicines. Not every single medicine in New Zealand is on that list. So all prescribed medicine is, but over-the-counters or pharmacy-only medicines aren't necessarily on that list. It does improve, but we found some examples where they weren't on the list. We've then got data presentation layer. I've mentioned already that patient information leaflets don't exist for all of the medicines. And even if you present that information in a form which is consumable for consumers, do they understand what it means? And does that help them make a decision to take the medicine or not, to report whether they've had a side effect or not, and to make sure that the medicine's having the benefit that they're expecting? Which kind of led us to, what next? So we built an iPhone app, and that was in the middle of last year. We thought there was value in understanding the difference between iPhones and Androids in making apps. We then added immunisations and allergies, and this was from a different data source. So the first data source we used was EPS. The second data source we're using is the same source that Manage My Health uses for immunisations and allergies. I mentioned before that interpretation is an interesting thing. We can't see quite on that slide, but if you don't have any allergies, it says NKA. And for most consumers, they won't know what NKA is. What it means is no known allergy. But we don't have a translation layer that turns the acronym that the GP uses and stores in their system, NKA, into something that the consumer then understands. Likewise with immunisations, the top immunisation there is DTaP, IPV, and a bunch of other acronyms which mean something to clinicians, but certainly don't mean anything to a consumer. So we don't have a translation layer that explains what those vaccinations are for a person that's talking to their family, trying to understand whether they've had the right vaccination and things like that. We then decided that the plan was to learn from a test audience. So we've built some things. We know what they can do, but let's talk to consumers about what we thought they wanted. So rather than us make decisions about what people want, let's seek feedback directly from a test audience. And basically towards the end of February, we were about a week away from going live with about 1,000 New Zealanders to test this application for us. And it turned out that we had to stop doing all of those things, build a castle with laser kiwis in each tower, and had to build actually a suit so we could fly around for the last 6 months. So unfortunately, we've kind of taken a bit of a stop, but it doesn't mean to say that we've stopped doing work in this space. The irony being a lot of our COVID response has relied on the work we've done here and other work we've been doing to understand an interoperable data system for the country. So utility and our ability to respond with the COVID pandemic has kind of been dependent on the work that we've been doing. So that kind of leads to, well, what is the big picture? So you've talked about the problems and you've talked about what you've done so far. So what is a national health information platform? We know that there are a bunch of people that like to consume health information. We know at the moment we've got health information from some data sources that are available to some people and not others. Generally speaking, that data is focused on providers and is written for providers and by providers. A health information platform is designed to be in the middle of that. So it's designed to think about interoperability. It's designed for common architecture and standards. It's designed for security, privacy, and trust. It offers foundation services. So while I've shown you a consumer application, the point of the consumer application isn't to replicate all of the applications out there. It's for us to understand the services that people need. So a manifestation such as a consumer app allows us to show people that a faster horse isn't necessarily the right option. Perhaps it's a motor car, to quote a famous person. We've then got an understanding around investment and commercial frameworks. So we need to make sure that we're not either creating markets that shouldn't exist or removing markets that need to continue to exist. And then the last side is it's no good continuing to deliver services that already exist. We should be thinking about innovation frameworks. Ironically, you know, it's as simple almost as the previous slide, which was just give me the data that I need. Our job, as we see it, is to act as a broker. So a broker of health information that is available to people as they need it, with the consumer controlling access to that. And when you think then about, well, what might that include? So we've got information that we've talked about so far, medicines. I talked about the difference between view services and do services. So viewing your medicines is kind of service number one, but renewing prescriptions or being able to see drug interactions between different medicines or being able to add over-the-counter medicines for those interactions, you can start to see medicines as almost a category of content or services, which we will build upon. And there's, at this point, kind of 16 that we're thinking about. There may be more, there may be less, but these both will have a number of services in them and or will interact in ways that will create new services. So from our perspective, it's making these data sets available from wherever they are to the people that need to use that information. I mentioned consumer control. I've talked about the fact that the data we have in EPS is good. One of the things is if you want to use it for fancy services, it needs to be collected consistently, needs to be programmatically collected. and needs to be available in a categorizable type manner. The example with medicines is when we started looking at the data we had, one of the ideas we had was we could show people how many pills they had left, the physical pills to take until they needed a refill of their prescription. It turned out 80% of the time that information was collected as free text. So while we had the data, we kind of didn't have the data to do fancy things with. So there's lots of learning beyond just having the data. We need the data to do the things that we want it to do. The other thing is, because there's so many data sets and so many things that could go wrong with people, the question for us is how do we target the right investment? So do we do more medicine services? Do we work on medicines as a thing? Or do we try and make viewable information available across the board? And that's kind of an interesting question, and I'm really interested in people's thoughts or questions about that. But more importantly, I suppose, is something that underpins all of that, and there's been some work done as a part of the Social Wellbeing Agency now on the data protection and use policy, and a project we ran with DIA last year. So I mentioned digital identity earlier. Between us and DIA and ACC, we worked on a project as part of the GovTech Accelerator, something called My Info, My Way. Some of the learnings from that are fundamentally people understand that they need to share their information to get services. The problem tends to come when they share that information for services and they end up not having their expectations met in how that data is used. So the key problem we have in terms of trust for consumers and building trust and participation is trying to have people understand, firstly, what data has been shared. Generally, there's not a problem with sharing the data. That's the findings. The problem comes when an organisation starts using the data in a way that the person didn't expect. Now, expectations are a personal thing. So my expectations about how my data are used are not consistent with other people. So one of the key things we need to consider when we do this is how do we set expectations about what data should be used for, and then make sure that we stick to it. This is kind of where we're starting to do our thinking and working on consumer consent models. At the moment, some of you might be familiar with how Canterbury has built out its Health One platform that is clinician-bound consent. So clinicians decide how and when to use and share information. When you think about it from a consumer perspective, we've got a health information privacy code which talks about reasons health information can be used. So while you might not be able to read the detail, what we've done is conceptually summarize the health information privacy code into 7 different categories. So on this slide, you can see some of them have green tick boxes, some of them have blue tick boxes, and some of those tick boxes are ticked already and some of them are unticked. That represents, for those different use cases, where you have a choice to either opt out or opt in. So opting out being the green button, opting in being the grey one that needs to be turned on, and a blue button where the services that we deliver, we need your information in order to deliver the services, so you don't have a choice to opt out of sharing that information. And an example of that would be something like contact tracing with the COVID response. We need your information, and legally speaking, we're required to have your information in order to do our job. If you then kind of take that to the next step, you know, there's a learn more button, and maybe that learn more button allows somebody to learn a bit more about what does it mean to share my information, how might it be used, and who says you're allowed to use it anyway. So taking someone to health information to the Privacy Commissioner website to get some lay summaries of how that might be used. So that's kind of the consent side. So that's the what are people allowing you to use the data for. We've then got the transparency side. So the other side to this is who has seen your information. And we know in the health system, and this is an international thing, HIPAA and a number of associated policies internationally, such as GDPR, mean that it's a requirement to keep logs of who's seen information and when they've seen it. One thing that's missing, going back a slide, is the why. So people care about why their data's been used. And so one of the things that many systems are missing is that ability to tell people why their data's been used. You can see on this page, I've got a link between, on the left-hand side, the consent you've given and the reasons the data was used. So it helps conceptually think about, for a consumer, I've had to give consent for this to be used, and it's been used in that way. So you can see maybe you would learn more, and you can see that for that care team, the reason was reason number one, which is your care team needs to use that information to deliver care. The person that, the organisation that looked at that data was your medical centre, and it was your GP that looked at it. Underneath my picture, which someone can get rid of the picture, you can see the type of information that was accessed. So there's kind of this interesting question of, do we have categories for different health information? So do you run that consent process for different types of information, or is it a blanket policy with some exceptions? You can imagine that not all health information is created equal. So maybe sexual health information or mental health information is treated differently with different sets of consents. But obviously, what I'm showing you, doing those types of things would add complexity. Maybe you show the detail of the fields that the GP looked at. But then again, do we know that the GP actually read what was in that field, or do we only know that it appeared on the screen? So you can start to see there's some complexity that we need to be able to design and build some examples that we can take out to consumers to help them understand what they're expecting to see, what is valuable, and how far do we need to go down this trail. What you might also be familiar with is that Apple started to do a bunch of work in this space. We've been talking to them quite a bit about their health app, and a lot of the thinking they're doing and what we're doing is quite similar. The interesting observation I would make is, in talking to Cupertino directly, the comments I made about much of this not being in the public domain, and much of the higher level knowledge management and information management for consumers being either not considered, not available, or something that's new. It was funny to hear a multinational company tell us, yes, we're finding the same thing, so we're working our way through it too. I suppose the difference between us and them was they said they've got 1,000 people working on it, and that's just about the size of the entire Ministry of Health. So it's an interesting kind of conversation to be having with a multinational. That's kind of the end of the talk. We've obviously can cut back to Russell, because I think this is a really interesting slide, and one which goes a long way to talking about the value of data, particularly I think in terms of an insurance lens, but also an allocative efficiency lens. So if we're not spending money on that, what are we spending the money on instead? Because at the point that we talk about an economy, there's a macroeconomic lens that you can apply to this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Hey, that was fantastic, John, and you can probably see why those of us in the insurance sector who rely so much on that kind of information, except seen through a different, lens or a process, we get a rather dubious kind of handwritten version of that. What we call it is sometimes the recollection process, or the 30-year memory test. And the prospect of having information in that form, which you're working towards, is very exciting for us. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan now. Nathan, if you would like to perhaps, I know that you helped us work on that last slide, which came up where we briefly talked about the value of possible changes, and even that was, really, it was about consumers, but kind of about the industry. So there's probably some broader stuff there, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, no, thank you, John, as well. Very exciting presentation there. And, someone who's, again, a customer of life insurance, and I see myself going through an application process that, is at least 30 minutes long. I'm going through and I'm trying to recall medical history for myself, for my family. I go through this very long and cumbersome process. And at the end of it, I'm not even guaranteed that I'm going to get a claim paid out because I could have forgotten something. And so as a customer, from a pure, what does this mean to me? It's giving me more peace of mind if I'm able to rely on something that's quite solid in terms of data, something where I don't have to be the one to decide what is valuable and what is not valuable in terms of assessing life insurance risk. So very excited, I think. And I think when you look at some of the waste that you see in underwriting, the claims time as well, when you look at declined claims, you look at fraud in the industry as well. Certainly, I think you could be saving up to $250 million a year easily. So I think there's all different areas of a life insurance life cycle and process that could be affected by data. And it does make me think part of the revolution isn't just getting new data. I think every life insurance company needs to put some real focus into, what is their data strategy? And you're probably doing this as well, John, in the ministry, and you're probably linking in with the kind of wider government strategy as well. But I think, if you're in a life insurance company right now and you haven't got a data strategy, you probably should be thinking about getting one. I think you should be thinking about the why in the same way, customers want to understand, why is my data being used? I think companies need to understand, why are we going to be using this data in exactly the same way, and make sure that that is all aligned. So yeah, I certainly think in terms of the revolution, Russell, I think there's a lot of opportunity for this. I think, I've touched on the underwriting and claims potential there, but I certainly see a lot of opportunity in the pricing space as well. There's an opportunity for us to price for products that currently are seen as unpriceable. And you may see this in long-term care. You may see this when it comes to if we were looking to pull some of the risks into bigger groups as well. Possibly even on the individual level as well. And also when you think of product design, which I'll let Alison talk more about, I think there's a real opportunity to link the needs of customers better with this information. And you're starting to see that overseas with bespoke products around diabetes or even HIV as well. And I think there's certainly in New Zealand a kind of perception that, mental health is kind of a tough one to crack. And I think information like this could probably help us come up with better solutions in the mental health space as well. Back to you, Russell.
Nice. Hey, I'm going to pass over to Alison in a moment, but I just want to remind our viewers that you can ask questions through your app. I believe the button's on the right, and then they'll appear in my chat, and then I will be able to put them to our panelists in the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes of our time. But Alison, I know that you use data a lot in your work, but would you like to expand a bit on that and the opportunities that you see and sort of where you see that headed?
Yeah, sure, Russell. Well, I guess there's a whole spectrum of use of data, but in the current market now more than ever, the use of both technology, data, and more importantly, really the insights from that are increasingly important, both in terms of pricing decisions, as Nathan sort of touched on, but also now in the overall sort of end-to-end product management. I think, we've all heard lots about conduct recently, and from a real conduct perspective, the data insights that we get now are really required to ascertain whether products remain fit for purpose. In terms of analysing sort of performance data and good customer outcome metrics, such as looking at loss ratios, decline rates, and data really needs to be analysed at a really granular level to provide those useful and valuable insights. Then we move to sort of market data, and there's lots of sources of market data out there. QPR, Quote Monster are also key in those valuable sources of data. And we use all of that to inform sort of future product development and really help identify opportunities to really provide tailored solutions and direct our resources where they really need to go. And then another key one really is the use of data analytics, which is really now today helping sort of key pricing decisions. They really give us better understanding of customers, both who our customers are, what's important to them, and what really drives their behaviour, which we then use and consider when setting our premium rates. We therefore have a real better understanding of our customers. It also gives us the ability to make us more responsive in how we operate, enabling us to identify trends much earlier and respond more quickly, helping to understand sort of the lapse rates, for example, which can be really considered when we're setting the prices, both and optimizing our rates, ensuring good customer outcomes, not only for new customers, but also really importantly in today's market for our existing customers to help retention.
Nice, fantastic. Probably open it up in terms of across the panel now and say, look, what, are the savings from adopting a more data-driven approach real, especially if we were able to obtain access to health information? How would that work, and what would some of the concerns be around the mechanisms for using that?
I'm happy to take a stab first. I think the interesting thing for me is concepts such as community rating. So what we see with increased availability of data is the ability to select healthier populations. So one of the interesting questions that kind of comes from making data available and putting consumers in charge is whether or not something like community ratings becomes a requirement for a population-based insurance model. Interesting kind of question. I don't know. The other kind of thought is it opens the door to different types of products. So there are some organized health insurers, particularly in the US, that are incentivizing behavioral change. And so if you look beyond kind of data about whether people are well or whether they're sick, you realize that being healthy is a series of regular behavioral choices, and being able to influence those behavioral choices are ways to try and keep people healthier for longer. And so things, and this kind of comes back to my comment about the do services versus the view services. If you make it easier for people to renew their prescriptions, hopefully it makes it more likely that they renew their prescriptions. If you make it easier for them to make healthy choices in terms of eating or stopping smoking, because that's connected to their app, and it means they can get free quitting smoking packs and things like that. You've got these tools which are bound directly to the person's identity, which they're choosing to participate in, which allows them to make those healthy choices on a regular basis. I think those two things are reasons that the costs might be real, but at the same time, there's kind of this interesting question about whether the US spends a lot on healthcare, or whether healthcare enables them to, or whether their economy allows them to spend a lot on healthcare, or whether the spending on healthcare creates the economy. So when you look at exports for the US, beyond military exports, healthcare devices and pharmaceuticals is one of their biggest exports. So does that allow them to spend more on healthcare, or is it the opposite? Do they spend more on healthcare because of that economic driver? And that's some interesting evidence out of Europe around some of this stuff, whereby additional spending on health results in a growing economy, which came out of the GFC work done by the EU. So
we're obviously optimistic about the role of insurers to both incentivize consumers to make positive behavior change, and there've been some significant examples of that recently in this market, and we like the idea that we would be able to also incentivize consumers via the price signal, and we can also help them when they begin to head down a track which might perhaps be averted with the behavior change. And certainly when we look at the range of non-communicable disorders, that can be really influenced by behavior. But Nathan, what do you think about those developments?
I agree with John. I think there's a lot of interesting insights we would be able to get from this data. I think the value is real, Russell. I think there's a lot of inefficiency in the New Zealand insurance industry that good data would be able to help fix. I mean, I think if you compare our insurance prices globally, we're certainly not on the cheap side. I guess we'd have to be very careful when we think about community rating and making sure it's it's going to work. There are differences in I guess mortality that we see across different cultural groups as well. I know myself being half Samoan, I'm very conscious of the Pacifica mortality versus say European mortality. But I think there's great opportunities there to touch some of the market that just isn't insured at the moment. I think the other thing we'll need to be careful about is obviously the kind of moral hazard issue. It'd be interesting to kind of see the usage of medication, for people who are insured versus not insured. And obviously, if you're looking to insure more people, just to try and understand, we fully understand those costs. But that's the actuary of me talking. But from a customer perspective, I think the value is real, and I think with enough competition, which we have in the market, you would certainly see some of that being passed back to the customer.
Yeah, we're well served with insurers, aren't we? But perhaps more from a customer perspective, I should turn to you, Alison, and say, hey, perhaps zeroing in specifically around engagement. The life insurance sector is historically a low engagement category. How could we achieve greater engagement? Not just thinking about using data from an underwriting perspective, but also in some of the wider, contexts or ideas that are available.
Okay. Russell. Okay, so sort of Nathan touched on some of the challenges that we face in terms of completing applications and underwriting, and the balance between pricing and ease of application and risk is a real fine one. Look, we'd love to be able to use data, the medical data that we just talked about, but a vast array of data to assist in that way, where you'd be able to take sort of health and lifestyle data in a way that means consumers are much more engaged and had some complete certainty over their disclosure requirements. And also really to develop some innovative products that are relevant to that sort of changing society needs. But to do this, you've really got to have access to some sort of large data pools. And in New Zealand, that can be challenging. So you can do that sometimes by partnering with other organisations, reinsurers, for example. They tend to pool all the data they get from not only the New Zealand market, but also from the global market as well. Banks, they're a huge source of data and the insights that you can get from there. And as John discussed, obviously, the sort of health institutionalised sort of data. To give you some sort of practical examples, in markets, for example, where car insurance is mandatory, I've been involved in developments where we were able to offer premium discounts, for example, on life cover using predictive analytics. They were able to provide a correlation between the risk of safe drivers, i.e. those with no claims history, and the impact on general mortality. And obviously you can take that, further and further. Nathan mentioned some innovations that have been done around diabetes. So if you can get real detailed analytical data and understand diabetes and the difference between people who manage that condition well, then that can enable insurers to provide more tailored insurance, especially if we have regular access to that ongoing health data. And if that shows that someone's managing their condition well, then maybe they can, get better tailored either pricing or products which is much more suitable to those people. However, the challenge with this is really the ability to utilise the data in terms of, and we've touched on it already, in terms of permissions, and then gathering sufficient sample sizes over a long enough period of time. And then when you put that into practice, especially with life insurance, you might not actually see the impact of that for several years to know whether your predictions were right or wrong. And hopefully you're not in that role when you find out that those predictions were wrong, maybe. And then taking this a step further, when you have access to a considerable amount of data, such as bank transactional data, this can provide similar predictions, which could also enable the underwriting process to be really streamlined or even removed. So some people might be surprised to know that actually there is a direct correlation between how you manage your finances. Those people who are continually overdrawn, having to use a lot of credit, there may be a direct correlation between their morbidity and their mortality, and that can be reflected. And then you can take that really down to a granular level and see people's shopping habits, those people who are buying fruit and vegetables versus those people who are buying cigarettes and alcohol. And I'm sure this point could get debated, either way. And also take that together with the health data that John talked about. You could really see a pay-as-you-go type insurance that looked at people's ongoing and changing health.
Mm-hmm.
But, the key challenges around that is access to personal data. How do New Zealanders feel about insurance companies having access to their financial data, their health data? It's a real matter of trust, and what's the balance and the trade-off?
We've heard a lot about trust over the course of the conference so far, and I know John mentioned that the issue of the concern that perhaps there might be some lives we don't want to insure, but also it's an opportunity that there'll be some lives that we'll we'll be more able to ensure, for example, if there's a condition where we can actually look into the data and say, but there actually is really good treatment adherence here. So we can feel more comfortable with that life because we don't have to rely on that hazy memory test. A couple of sort of more technical questions are coming through. Maybe I'll give a couple of these to you at once, and we'll see how we can work through them. But one of them is, for example, how big is the data set? How far does it go back? What about migrants? What about overseas treatment? So I'll throw those to you, John.
Yeah, good questions. So New Zealand's had an NHI number, which is tagged to all of the health information in the health system for about 38 years now. So, so it goes back a while. Just about all of the data in both the private and the public system are tagged to the NHI. And so it's not a case of the data not being able to be attributed to a person. It's the problem is a person being able to claim it. So claim it and gather it up themselves and then choose how and who and why people use it. So from our perspective, the problem being is there is a lot of data. The question is, should we focus on all of the data at once and try and raise the tide? Or should we focus on specific data sets that are more valuable to consumers or to other people that want to use it and make them better quickly and worry about other data sets later? So that's kind of one of the interesting things we're working through is there more value in doing more with some data, or is there more value in wider data sets and doing less with each of them? So the problem we've got is and so this is kind of a relatively uninformed opinion, but I think the problem we've got is in order to build a model with trust, consumers need to participate in it. In order for consumers to participate, they have to see value in it. So generally speaking, you tend to care about the things you can affect with regard to health. So you tend to take the pills that you think are making you better, but you might not see value in having access to information that, while might be interesting to an insurance company, might not be interesting and relevant to you as a consumer. So I think there's a really interesting tension between the willingness to participate from a consumer perspective and the value that other people get from the data. So I think that's something that's yet to be explored. It's evident in perhaps, something that I can describe it as an example is allergy information is kind of a really interesting one. So the health system, clinicians largely believe in allergies that have been proven. And what they mean by that is either by a dermatologist or a skin scratch test, or through a report to the Centre for Adverse Reactions for Medicines. Now, consumers don't necessarily see that as what an allergy is, and would probably see value, funnily enough. So when we did the work to build the personas and the life journeys, they saw real value in being able to write down what their allergies were as they saw them, which might have been an allergy to rubber gloves or an allergy to this type of food. While the health system didn't value it, it's ironic that the person did. And the reason they value it often is because they see that as having either a consequence to them or having had a consequence in their interaction with the health system before. So, the example of I was in hospital and they gave me food with gluten in it, and obviously that made my condition worse, and so I couldn't go home when I needed to. Or every time I go in, I tell them that I'm allergic to standard gloves, and so because they don't remember that or because that's not written down anywhere, I have to tell them that every time. So you can start to see there's a really interesting difference between what might be valuable to a consumer and what might be valuable to an insurance company or even a clinician or a population health analyst, which is kind of the interesting question and problem statement.
Hey, we're running down the clock, and we could spend at least another hour and or more working through this. I just want to get a couple of last reactions from each of you. We talk sometimes excitedly about it being a data revolution. If it is, then sometimes it seems to be a bit slow moving at times. We'd like things to be able to go faster and realize some of these benefits sooner. and yet, large projects, especially with multiple stakeholders, take time to work through. So I'm going to pose a question to each of you, which is, what could we do to make this go quicker? And I'll go just a very brief word. We've got 2 minutes left. So Alison first.
I think the simple answer to that is we need to be brave, and we need to find ways to be able to test and learn and be innovative. So be brave would be my words.
Nice, yeah. And John.
I think from our perspective, we've seen the ability to be fast in COVID. I think the brave word's a really good one. I think the other thing is we need to learn to do things in a new way. So it's not do new things, but it's to use kind of cloud platforms and different ways of working as a way to get things done faster. And that's kind of probably been the biggest learning we've had in the last 2 years is if you use cloud platforms and you work in a more agile manner, things get done a lot faster. And so I think that's kind of the big learning for us, and it doesn't always require a waterfall project.
Fantastic. Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I think we need a leader, similar to Alison in terms of being brave. I think we need a life insurer out there in the New Zealand market who is really going to lead the way. I think everyone's kind of been a little nervous. You've probably seen a lot of underinvestment as well in life insurance, fair to say, over the last, 10, 20 years. So I think we really need someone who's excited by this, who says, look, I'm gonna run with this. I'm gonna work with John or whoever, and let's actually make a real change to the customer proposition, the customer journey, and start down that road. And I think you will quickly see some fast followers trying to catch up.
That is fantastic. Once again, thank you to each of our panelists. I think that there is so much opportunity to grow from this point. I think there are many connections also out to subjects like insurance contract law review, which is coming, and also to obviously the key issues with our customers of conduct and trust. And if we can move forward in this way, then I think it's going to be a very, very exciting time for the sector. Once again, I'd like to thank our participants, John, Alison, and Nathan, and also big thanks to the Financial Services Council, my colleagues on the conference committee, and especially those that had to run around very quickly this afternoon and add in some details for us. So thank you once again, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
What a fantastic, engaging audience you've all been. It's hard not to get involved with the discussion with so many great speakers sharing their wisdom on such important topics for the sector. We hope that you've found the day as interesting and as valuable as we have. As we bring day 2 to a close, take time to absorb the knowledge from today and rest up for another huge day tomorrow. This conference is going to end on a high note. We look forward to seeing you back here rested and rejuvenated for what looks to be a stellar cast of speakers and panellists. Bring your breakfast, grab a coffee and sit tight. Once again, if you have any questions about the event, please email events@fsc.org.nz and the events team will be in touch. I'm Kirsten Young, Regional Manager, Astron Life, and I've been your MC for day 2. I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing the show with you today, and I look forward to joining the virtual audience tomorrow. Thank you to the team here in the studio, and have a good night. Inohora.